So we are now recording.
Okay.
You should see some kind of little indicator up there that, like a little cloud with the red dot on it. That
Yeah.
we are recording.
Thank you, Terry.
You're welcome.
So the topic of this morning's forum is what are we doing and can we do more? And the easy answer to both of those questions is a lot. But in fact, there's more to say about all of that. And one of the things which I did in preparation for this morning was look at our advice and queries on the Friends Meeting of Austin page. And I'm just going to drop the link in. You all know that page, but it's always worth revisiting. And so much of what we do is informed by so many of these advices and queries. As a way of putting some sort of larger context around the question, I thought that two of these queries were particularly relevant now, and one of them comes from equality and one of them comes from civic responsibility. And of course, issues related to peace and social concerns relate to so many more. They relate to participation in the life of the meeting, unity, mutual care, peace, of course. But I thought I would just read two of these queries to frame a larger conversation, not just about what the meeting is doing, what peace and social concerns is doing, but also what we as individuals are doing. And I would invite each of us to consider sharing some activity that we've been engaged in, whether as part of the meeting or outside of the meeting, that helps further some of these ministries, not as an exercise in patting ourselves on the back, but as an exercise in worship sharing and encouragement, mutual encouragement. Because of course, what are we doing and can we do more? The answer to both is lots. But anyway, so that's sort of the kind of structure that I was thinking we could put to this. And let me just read the two queries that spoke to me as I was thinking about this morning. And from equality, do we search diligently for ways of assuring the right of every individual to be loved, cared for, and educated properly, to obtain useful employment, and to live in dignity? And I'll share one other query from civic responsibility, which is, what are we doing as individuals and as a meeting to carry our share of responsibility for the government of our community, state and nation, and for the development of needed international organizations? How are we working for changes in government when change is needed? And I'm sure each of us have our favorite advices and queries. These two in particular speak to me at this point in our, at this point, issues of equality and civic responsibility are important, larger contextual reasons for having a standing committee on peace and social concerns. And of course, there are specific ways in which we've been engaged in recent weeks and months in answer to these queries. But there have been ways that the meeting has been engaged in these for years. And so before we sort of talk a little bit about what we might be doing as individuals, I'd love to share a little bit about what the meeting has been doing for many years, and invite people to add to what I've got to say, because I'm a relative newcomer, and there's more to say than what I know about. But you know, we've obviously we've got a COVID fund which has been distributed over $10,000 in the last couple of months. But that's not the only means for us to engage on questions of equality and civic responsibility. The Benevolence Fund is an important way of supporting those in need among us. There are other specific ways that the meeting has, over decades, been involved in providing direct assistance. I'm thinking of Noah's Ark, the Columbia Ministry, Friends Peace Teams. These are activities that we engage in as a collective body. These are activities that help those among us who don't necessarily have the means to individually give as much as we'd like to, or to meet the vast need that's out there. And so, you know, the meeting has been engaged in for years in a lot of work. What are we doing? That's a little bit about what we're doing. There's more to say. We've written a minute on responding to police violence. Most recently, we're considering another minute on the 13th Amendment that has been discussed at recent business meetings. And so I'd love to stop talking and hear from others on the topic of what are we doing, and then consider the question, can we do more, sort of as a separate thread. And so I'd welcome thoughts about what the meeting has been doing, what we as individuals are doing to further our peace and social concerns testimonies. I'd welcome thoughts about individual testimonies, advices and queries that speak to you on these questions, and any other contribution in the spirit of the forum topic.
One of the long-standing and important missions of the meeting has been prison ministry, and Erica and Joanna and Tobin can probably talk, and Howard have all been, and I have all been involved in that, and I for a shorter time than the others. So it would be good for them to talk maybe about the history of that.
I guess I'm not seeing. Let me get my gallery view here so I can see who else is in here. Okay. Oh, I see Joanna there. Okay. I was just trying to figure out who had familiarity.
Howard, are you wanting me to talk?
I was just maybe not wanting to be the first person to talk about it, because I think I don't have the depth of experience and things that other people do. I see you there, so yeah.
Okay. Well, I will say that Glenna and I started corresponding with one prisoner each on death row about 20 years ago. And it was in response to Deanne Johnson standing up at announcements at Rise of Meeting at the old meeting house with 2 letters in her hands and saying, I have 2 letters from men on death row who would like pen pals. And Glenna found herself being requested as a spiritual advisor because the man she was going to be writing to, or what the man she started writing to, was had his list all full of family members already. You're allowed to have 10 people on your list of visitors, and he wanted her to visit, and the only way she could visit was if she was a spiritual advisor. I believe that is accurate. I'm so sorry Glenna's not here. So she asked for a support committee, and she has been meeting with her support committee ever since as a spiritual advisor, to support her as a spiritual advisor to the same person that she's been visiting all that time. She also visits another man, but as a regular person, I believe. Ugh. I'm not really sure. I'm so sorry. If you're a spiritual advisor, you can bring a Bible in.
I think she visits with him as a spiritual advisor also.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Okay. Thank you, Melissa. And then I'm not sure at what point Mary got involved, but she also got involved as a spiritual advisor. And so people from our meeting have been corresponding with and visiting individuals who are incarcerated on death row since about the year 2000, maybe 1999. I don't know about before that. There may have been something before that that I'm not aware of. Several of us, Howard and Galia, myself and Mary Hampton, I'm not sure who else, have had it happen that the person that we were corresponding with and or visiting was actually executed. And Walter, of course, has had that experience. Is Walter on this call? I'm on the phone.
He's not.
No.
He's not.
Okay, so, and I know there have been friends involved in vigils outside of the Capitol. Also, there used to be vigils, but I don't think there are anymore. All right, I don't know if there are anymore at the Capitol. I mean, I haven't been. So, you know, there used to be vigils a long time ago, before the year 2000, behind the governor's mansion. And I know that Walter and his whole family were involved in that. I'm going to add while we're at it, on the subject of death row and prison ministry, the annual holiday cards, which have been going on for, I believe, 12 years. I'm not really sure, maybe. And this year we will do it without color and probably just in an envelope with a black and white image rather than color, because the rules have changed. But we'll still try to send something to every person who is on death row. As far as community, sometimes some of us may have written, well, of course the meeting sends letters every time somebody's going to be executed, which is really good, to the Board of Pardons and Paroles and also to the governor. Is that correct?
Yes.
And but sometimes some of us may have been involved in other things having to do with legislation and legislators and protests and so on and so forth. That's all outward facing. I want to say that inward facing, those of us who travel to death row together and travel to death row together and back, have gotten to know each other very well and built meaningful, close relationships based on that shared experience. And one person on death row, Bobby Moore, is no longer on death row because of actions arising from an attender at our meeting starting to be his pen pal and doing work, getting him a good lawyer, and that's Robin Dunn. So that's an amazing, wonderful thing that's happened. And that just came from her saying, I think I'd like to correspond with somebody. And he was the one that she corresponded with, and really, it's amazing. So that's enough. I talked too much. Sorry.
I'll add a little bit to that, which is that a number of years ago, Glenna also issued an invitation for a group of us to form a kind of support group for Harvey Irvin, T's poetry. And since then, we've been meeting monthly to correspond with T and reflect on his writing, his poetry, his artwork now. And the group has kind of come down to a regular 3 folks now, but others, certainly many more were involved for a good while after it started. But that's been, I don't know, a number of years that we've been doing that. And that has been extremely rewarding and touching and enlightening as an experience for me.
I'm curious, those of you who are involved with the prison ministry, whether there's been any changes or things that you've learned as sort of the pandemic has happened in relation to what's going on in the prisons?
Very scary, basically. Some prisons have had massive outbreaks, a number of them. At the Polunsky unit, where the death row is one wing of that unit, has had significant cases between staff and prisoners. And it's not clear that that has hit the isolated death row wing where they're in solitary confinement for 22, 23 hours a day. But it's always a threat because the folks who prepare the food, the folks who deliver the food, the officers who manage things are all subject and danger, and in danger, as are the prisoners, of catching the virus. So it is frightening. We haven't heard from T in I don't know, a month or more, and so we are concerned. We're sending another letter. We just sent another letter out to him, but we're hoping that the fact that he's not in the general population is helpful because they are isolated, which talk about sheltering in place, but they still have to be attended to by folks who are not able to shelter and are active in the prison. But prison population, like the nursing homes and assisted living areas, are highly vulnerable because of the closed-in nature of their confinement.
I just heard from the man that I visit a week or so ago, and he didn't mention it. So I took that as kind of a good sign that at least within his small area, things are not immediately scary. The man that I used to visit in Maryland, however, has talked quite a bit about it. I think they haven't had as much in that prison as in others, but he's very aware of it and very frightened.
I should share that I'm sorry Walter isn't on the call because on Friday he shared with the committee that he'd learned of a death from COVID at the Polonsky unit on death row. Jose Briseño, which I don't see any news about. So this may have just happened. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about that, but yeah, I thought I'd share that. The other thing I'll drop into the chat is a link to a project from Texas After Violence Project called Sheltering Justice, which is a project to gather information from family members, friends, and inmates about the impact of COVID on people who are incarcerated. So James, you may, and others might be interested in learning more about that. Sorry, Terry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just a little confused about whether we were just specifically focusing on prison ministry and death penalty, or whether this was a more I thought this was a more well, let me just kind of throw in some kind of broad reflection on how we operate as a meeting with pieces and social concerns. And my association with the meeting goes back to the mid 60s with some big long gaps in between, but I remember well, what I mainly wanted to focus on here is that, with the possible exception of some of the prison work, that the meeting generally tends to operate through larger community efforts and other independent efforts, as opposed to, being an entity that stands alone, the friends meeting on, sanctuary or something like that. So over the years, when in the earliest part of my association, we had an AFSC office, and there was some intense involvement around the Vietnam War and around the farm worker movement. For those of you who are old enough to remember those such things. And then after the big gap, I was back. This meeting, as others, was very intensively involved in the sanctuary movement. And over time, the meeting tends to respond to major social issues of the day, like, for example, our statement on police violence, that we make a public statement that individual members of the meeting are active in the various community groups that are on the forefront of that, and the meeting supports those individuals and supports those organizations, as, for example, we do the current sanctuary coalition, and so that, and then we take part in demonstrations and so on. And the issues have been peace issues, have been issues of social justice and economic justice in Latin America, the work with Colombia in particular, and the work with Central American Sanctuary in particular, and the current work, and their support of Hasta Tan Cerca. So there's really very broad involvement, but it's mostly been through that mode of not being the sort of a standout entity, but through supporting members and associated community organizations. So I guess, a question one could raise is that enough? Is that continues to be our kind of modus operandi? Is that enough, or should the meeting have some more kind of identifiable presence in the community around issues like that?
Yeah, I like how you framed that, Terry, because the meeting topic, the question is, what are we doing, and is that enough? And when I was reflecting earlier and listening to you, it's, for me, the answer to that question lies in the how are we operating? How am I operating as an individual, and how are we operating as a corporate body? And it's harder for me to speak to how we are operating as a corporate body because it's hard enough for me to get in touch with how I'm operating as an individual, especially if I don't go often to business meetings and things like that. But I, as an individual within the greater Quaker context, I do benefit and learn a lot from Quaker, and this isn't specifically about COVID, but I learn a lot about Quaker practices that I can apply to my own life. Like in my family setting, you know, there was an instance when I stepped aside and I took that as an opportunity to lecture my family about what that means in Quaker practice. But I think for me, the biggest lesson upon reflection of late with being involved with the Quakers is, and how does this fit into what Terry's asking? I don't know the answer, but letting others lead and following others' leads. And this has been, especially in the Austin Sanctuary Network group, for me, this has been the big lesson for me is letting Ilda and Yvonne and Illyrio be the leaders instead of us, me as an individual, us as white people in, you know, in the small group of people in ASN and probably the Quakers too. You know, just learning how to do that. And that takes a lot of, you know, privilege checking, and it just takes a lot of work. And then one more thing to relate this to my paid employment of teaching, there's surveys out there, and the surveys are asking the families, you know, what do you want? Do you want in-person education, or do you want remote learning? And to me, you know, this is not listening to the public. This is manipulation, because what they're going to do is they're going to take those survey results, if they get any, and they're going to turn it against the neediest families who their needs, nobody's asking them, what are your needs? That's what they should be asking them, and how can we support you? Because what's going to happen, my greatest fear, is that, you know, people are going to die and get sick, and the school district, from a legal perspective, and the TEA, and the big man on top, the AG, who I hold responsible for a lot, but those guys are going to turn it around and blame the victims and blame the families and say things like, well, you know, this is what you said. No, it's not what they said. You just never listened to them in the first place. And I'm done talking.
That makes me think of one of the themes that we're developing with the anti-racist awareness group, which was active for long before I got involved, and Melissa can speak to that probably better than anyone I can notice here, or perhaps Erica. But the idea of acting as a force and a leadership and a decision-making group tends to come easily to white population, and the idea of listening, learning, following, supporting, and being guided by and becoming more aware of another person's culture and lifestyle and experience is much harder to do. And those kind of tendencies of white culture compared to the cultures of color that's a challenging one.
Back to the original question that Jim posed, which Terry answered really wonderfully in an overall umbrella sense. I'd like to say that Peace and Social Concerns has under its umbrella not just the death penalty or prison ministry, which is one aspect of its work, not just the social concerns, which is certainly a huge aspect and brings us into interface with other organizations, other groups, non-Quaker, as well as Quaker, but also Earth Care Witness, which used to be a standalone committee and was absorbed back into the Peace and Social Concerns Committee. And some of the things that we do at our meeting or have done at our meeting house on the property and so on, indoors and outdoors, arise from that awareness. Small example being using reusable washcloths rather than paper towels for drying our hands. I don't know how COVID is going to affect that, but that was a decision made by the Earth Care Witness Committee way back when we first came to this meeting house. Other examples can surely be shared, and I know that individuals do an awful lot along these lines in their homes and in their lives. And maybe I'm going to specifically invite Melissa and Tobin to start, but anybody.
I know when when Citizens Climate Lobby had its first startup meeting with the director of the national organization, one of the members of the UU Church on Grover came to the meeting and put aerators in each one of our faucets in order to reduce the flow of the water in the meeting house. He just was in the habit, like Johnny Appleseed. His little aerators followed him wherever he went, and I have them in my house because of him. I personally, because I'm a child of the Depression, I do an awful lot of stuff that lots of people think are crazy. I drain the milk from the last bottle into the new bottle. I drain the grapefruit juice from the last bottle into the new bottle. My mother used to scrape the butter papers. Now the papers for butter don't stick to the butter, so I can't do that anymore. But I use rags instead of paper towels. I've used as little toilet paper as I can get away with. I have an electric car. And I'd love the meeting if we can think of, for instance, rags instead of paper towels. Love the meeting to think of ways in which we can, when we get back there, do the same thing. And of course, I'm pretty active in the CCL lobbying Congress to pass a carbon in dividend.
Which brings to
so
mind also the fact that when we did purchase and gain access to the current property, we spent $40,000 of our funds, along with about $60,000, I think, from the city to put in 20 kW solar panels, and we've kept those up, which has required a couple of three inverters, I think, two of which we've been involved with paying for because they needed to be upgraded or replaced. So there are things that we did as a meeting for that overall kind of climate impact, as well as just feeling like we're responsible for the property and for maintaining it in a as natural and healthy a way as we can.
I wanted to bring in one more sort of aspect about how we operate, and that is over time, we have various committees and groups that are working on specific areas of social concern. Like, you know, we had the Earthquake Witness, we've had the death penalty work be a standing committee, etc. And what this brings up is what's the role of peace and social concerns? And when we have an effort around a specific focus of social concern, should this be an independent working group? Should it be a standing committee? Should it work through peace and social concerns? And I don't think we've ever completely mastered that formula. My view has been that we should have working groups and not attempt to make these standing committees, and that those working groups, that the role of peace and social concerns should be a way of supporting, nurturing, and encouraging those working groups. And they're not necessarily subgroups of the committee, so they're not appointive and don't have to be appointive. They can be more organic and more, you know, self-driving, and that we don't have to restructure the committees, you know, when one of these things emerges or lays itself down. But that's been tricky, you know, some people feel like that around certain very important social concerns that being a standing committee is important. So I'm not sure where we are on that now, and if there's some way that we need to be thinking about that that would encourage more social concern activity.
The resources, ad hoc resources committee comes to mind as a major investment of time, energy on the part of several people, which kind of crosses those standing committees that we're used to, stewardship, finance and administration, social concerns, et cetera, house and grounds. So that would be an example of the broader open kind of activity rather than an ongoing standing committee.
Something else that comes to mind is, and I'm sorry that Larry isn't with us to talk about FCNL and lobbying activities that, and Tobin, can you say something? You're muted. Sorry, you're still muted.
Down there, we have an active group with several folks. I mean, Liz has been forever a member of FCNL active, and Larry is our connection most directly. But yes, we meet. Now we're meeting a couple times a month with the advocacy team in Austin, and that traditionally it follows a certain theme for FCNL, which we continue to lobby and have had meetings and have had letters to the editor and things like that. But it also sometimes supports other issues than just the single focus point of that year's, you know, area of interest. But yeah, we're active in the FCNL.
I really like Terry's concept of the working groups, which are sound like they maybe are more fluid, less formal than committees, but can exist as long as they need to. And I'd like to think about how we might be setting those things up. And maybe we don't. Maybe we just kind of recognize, hey, there's a bunch of friends here who are doing X thing. That's a working group, and leave it at that. I don't know, or maybe there's something. I guess. And in Terry's spirit, we don't want to formalize them too much, but we want them maybe recognized. Would that be how we do it?
Seems to me we already have, I'm an interloper. I'm sorry, I got a telephone call that I needed to be at, but I intended to be with you guys. It seems to me as if we already have that. We have a group of people who go out to the prison. We have a group of people who are doing FCNL work. We have a group of people who are doing racism work. And it seems to work that way pretty well.
Yeah.
And all of those groups know that they can come to the meeting or mostly to Peace and Social Concerns for funds if they need it. We have somebody we have a couple of people, but mostly Claire, who's doing work with the Austin Sanctuary Network. It would be nice to have more people doing work on the sanctuary stuff. I think Claire would agree with me.
Yeah.
It would be nice to have somebody else doing it. Yeah, so.
Well,
go ahead.
I expect we'll continue to do things in this way. The question that occurs to me is can we do more question can also be phrased as can we do more to encourage, to nurture, to keep track of, to enable these working groups and individuals who are being a presence in the community.
Can we do more and how do we do that is what is coming to me. No answers are coming to me. I mean, I remember at one of the, what's it called, that yearly meeting, the one I went to, the one in Toledo.
Gathering.
What is it called?
White Privilege
Gathering.
Conference.
No, I went to that 10 years ago, but I'm talking the Quaker conference in
Talking
Toledo.
about the Friends General Conference Gathering.
Thank you. Okay.
The meeting is called the Gathering. It used
Gathering. Okay. So a couple years ago at the Gathering, I'm sure we've all heard this before, but just kind of the image of, replacing people when people get tired, because of course everybody would like their group to have more, more support or more people from the Austin Quaker group in it. But, I know other people are so busy and doing other really important work. And so the image that I remember from somebody talking is just like, okay, just relieving people who need breaks at the front lines, and then another group moves in, and then another group moves in, and it just keeps the wave going. But again, I don't know how, but I think that recognition that it kind of goes in waves where, there's a front line of people and then they need to step back and take a break and more people step in on the end.
That's sort of how I ended up clerking Peace and Social Concerns, because Charles moved south. Joanna, you had your hand raised.
I wanted to say that in answer to the how that was just posed, Erica deserves a lot of appreciation for the communications, letting people know what's going on. Now, of course, you could lead a horse to water, but like right now we're being recorded. Okay. So anybody in the meeting who's not participating right now could listen in on this later and learn some of what Peace and Social Concerns does and some of how it's done individually, corporately, etc. And maybe be inspired to participate more, or say, oh, I'd like to be more active in that. And, I could actually join the Peace and Social Concerns Committee. Although it is an open committee, you don't need to be a member to come to its meetings. So big thanks to Erica for publishing, religiously isn't the right word, faithfully publishing information that shares with people who read it what's going on and what they can participate in. And I think that makes a big difference. Thanks.
I think a current example of that is the Hiroshima events that are going to be happening this coming week. They're in the bulletin for people to be aware that there's activities going on. The other thing I want to mention is as Terry set up the website, we have a way of identifying groups and it takes a little bit of work to get them set up, but if that's a way we can help people communicate and share information who are interested in earth care or death penalty work or some of the various activities, just to highlight that page exists and say, oh, here are some of the kinds of activities that members of the meeting are involved in, and here's how you can communicate with the folks who are doing that and learn more, maybe become involved. Some way of sharing that might be a way to help encourage more participation and just more knowledge of what actually is happening.
Howard and then Joanna.
And this got partially addressed by what Erica just said, but I think it would be a nice idea to take another hour. It's almost like an extension of this time to say, let's do a kind of a formal inventory, I think, of all the things we're doing, and then see, just so we've got it all out there in front of us, and then maybe, and where are some things that we aren't doing that people are interested in, and that might be a way of just as a big umbrella sort of idea, figuring out where we all want to go and the things we want to go there with. So that was my thought.
Would that be something we should add to the future forum topic list, I guess? Would that be the hour for that? Cool. Okay, I'll go ahead and do that.
I want to also appreciate James for doing the Facebook page, which I have every now and then found myself on. And it's not someplace that I go for Quakerism, but I know a lot of people are into online things like Facebook. And then there's Emma and Slack. And James, can you say anything about either one of those?
Sure. I guess, yeah, I haven't been incredibly active with Facebook, in part just because I'm so angry with Facebook and don't feel like they're necessarily an organization we should be supporting with tremendous amounts of content at the moment, or ever maybe. But it's good. I think it is. People are there, and it is important to have a presence there and be available and visible, and just have our information. And if people do want to use that platform, definitely that is there for everyone. The Slack has actually some interesting sort of social concerns and sort of politics questions have started to sort of crop up there. There's sort of a separate conversation in which those topics have started to be sort of discussed. Yeah, so that's sort of an interesting development, that there is sort of growing political discussion on that platform as well.
Wait for Jim to.
Yeah.
Oh, Liz.
I really like the idea of somehow taking the time to make some web pages that would help people know what we are actually doing, and the content management that Terry set up on the web page makes that very easy for just about anybody to volunteer to maintain one of those sites. So maybe we should think about that. It's extra work for Peace and Social Concerns possibly to do that, but I think maybe Terry and I will talk about it, because I know how to use that content management system at this point. I've learned it just recently. And so it would be really, really nice for us to have some of the things we're doing, because I don't think most of the meeting knows what actually is happening, or knows how to get involved in it, and that might lead them to be able to get involved in it.
I did want to just note about the group pages. They're not hard to set up. I mean, I can do them. I can set one up really quick. The hard part is getting people involved in it and sort of doing the training and that sort of thing. But I didn't want anyone to hesitate to ask to set one up.
Well, we're coming in on the top of the hour and should probably wrap things up before meeting for worship. I just want to thank everyone for what I think was a very productive hour of conversation around issues of peace and social concern. And thank you, James, for proposing the topic, which I think was a generative one. And I like very much the idea of continuing the conversation and maybe doing some formal work to clarify these questions. Shall we close with a moment of silence?